In a quiet corner of a Warsaw museum sits a small leather bag. Its handles are cracked, its sides scuffed by years of use. To most visitors, it looks ordinary, just another old traveler's bag. But this bag carried everything a mother could save when her world collapsed. It held the last pieces of home for a family who had to choose, stay and risk everything, or walk into the unknown. This is the story of Zofia Kowalska and the 600 kilometers that changed her life forever. It was late August 1939. Warsaw was a city of over 1 million people, living through what seemed like an ordinary summer. The days were warm, the skies brilliantly clear, children played in the parks, mothers shopped at markets, gathering extra flour and sugar, just in case. The newspapers carried worrying headlines, but life continued its familiar rhythm. Zofia Kowalska walked these same streets, a mother and a trader who understood the pulse of the city's markets. She noticed the small changes first, the way prices fluctuated, how certain goods became harder to find, the quiet tension in every conversation. Men received mobilization notices. Families began digging trenches in the public squares, an activity that brought neighbors together but filled everyone with unease. Mothers sewed small identity tags into their children's clothing, a precaution no one wanted to speak about out loud. The city was preparing, but no one truly believed what was coming. Zofia lived with her children in Warsaw. She was known for her practical mind and her skill in trade, abilities that had helped her family navigate the uncertain economy of the 1930s. She understood value, knew how to negotiate, how to stretch resources when times grew difficult. Her leather bag was a constant companion, carried to markets and business dealings throughout the city. It wasn't large, but it was sturdy, made to last. She had owned it for years, and its worn handles fit comfortably in her grip. Her days followed a predictable pattern, managing her household, caring for her children, conducting her trade. She believed in planning ahead, in being prepared. But no amount of preparation could ready anyone for what September would bring. In those final days of August, Zofia did what mothers throughout Warsaw were doing. She stockpiled what she could, she watched her children play, holding those moments a little tighter, and she waited, hoping the storm would pass over them. Life in Warsaw that summer carried a strange quality, normal on the surface, but underlaid with worry. The markets were still full of fresh vegetables, bread, and milk, but the conversations between shoppers had changed. Zofia moved through these markets with purpose, her leather bag over her shoulder. She knew which vendors to trust, which goods would keep longest, what items might become valuable if circumstances changed. Her trading instincts told her to prepare for disruption. At home, ordinary routines continued. Children needed feeding. Clothing needed mending, lessons needed reviewing. The rhythm of family life provided comfort, a sense that, despite the newspaper headlines, their world would hold together. But the signs were everywhere for those willing to see them. Military trucks moved through the streets more frequently. Radio broadcasts grew more urgent. Windows throughout the city were being taped to prevent shattering, a small acknowledgement that modern war had learned to strike from above. Zofia had difficult conversations with her children, trying to explain without frightening them. She taught them what to do if the siren sounded, where to shelter, how to stay calm. These were lessons she never imagined she would need to teach. The summer heat continued, day after day of clear blue skies, beautiful weather that would soon prove tragically perfect for what was to come. The last evening of August carried a weight in the air. Not storm clouds, the sky remained stubbornly clear, but something had shifted. Mothers could feel it, that instinct that tells you something is wrong even when you cannot name it. Zofia noticed it in small things, the unusual number of people in the streets after dark, the way neighbors spoke in hushed tones, the sound of vehicles moving through the city throughout the night. Radio broadcasts became more frequent, interrupting regular programming with official announcements. The government urged calm, but advised preparation. The contradictions were impossible to ignore. That night, Zofia checked her preparations one more time. The leather bag sat near the door, packed with essentials, documents wrapped carefully in cloth, some food, warm clothes despite the heat, and small items of value that could be traded if needed. She tried to sleep, but rest wouldn't come. Somewhere in the darkness she could hear the distant sound of trains, moving men and equipment through the night. The city was holding its breath, waiting for dawn. Dawn came on September 1st, 1939, not with gentle light, but with the wail of sirens. The sound cut through the morning silence like a blade. Zofia woke instantly, her heart already racing. The children stirred, confused and frightened by the noise. Then came the first distant thuds, a sound like thunder, but steady, rhythmic, wrong. The ground trembled. Windows rattled in their frames. From somewhere outside came the sound of people running, voices calling out, confusion spreading through the streets like wildfire. Zofia gathered her children quickly, moving them away from the windows toward the interior of their home. The sirens continued their awful song. Radio broadcasts crackled with urgent instructions, but the static made some words impossible to hear. The first day passed in a blur of sirens, explosions in the distance, and radio reports that grew increasingly dire. By the second day, smoke was visible over parts of the city. By the third, the choice became clear: stay in a building that might collapse or take their chances on the roads. On September 6, a radio broadcast called for all able-bodied men to leave Warsaw and head east. The announcement triggered a wave of movement that swept up entire families. If the men were leaving, how could mothers stay with their children in a city under siege? Zofia made her decision. They would go.
Packing for a journey with no destination and no known duration is an impossible task. How do you condense a lifetime into what can be carried? Zofia moved through her home one final time, making choices that felt both crucial and arbitrary. The leather bag could hold only so much. Documents went in first: birth certificates, property papers, proof of who they were. Jewelry was sewn into the lining of a coat. Food came next, whatever could travel without spoiling. She packed practical clothes, sturdy shoes for the children, items that could be traded if food ran short. Her trader's mind calculated constantly: what has value, what has weight, what is essential. But there were other items too: a photograph, a small toy her child refused to leave behind, a letter. Things that had no practical value but somehow felt necessary. Objects that proved they had once had a home. The children watched with wide eyes as their world was reduced to what could fit in that leather bag and a small pack each could carry. They asked questions she couldn't answer. Where are we going? When will we come back? Will our things be here when we return? Zofia promised what she could and stayed silent about her fears. Just before dawn, before the sirens could start again, they stepped out into streets already filling with others making the same terrible choice. The door closed behind them. Zofia didn't look back. Her hand found her children's hands, the leather bag hung heavy on her shoulder, and they joined the river of people flowing east. The roads leading out of Warsaw had transformed into rivers of humanity. Thousands upon thousands of people, all moving in the same direction, creating a column that stretched as far as the eye could see. This was not an army march, with its disciplined pace and order. This was something older, more primal, a migration of the dispossessed. Mothers with children, elderly couples, families pushing carts loaded with their remaining possessions, all of them moving slowly, desperately south and east. Zofia and her children walked among them. The pace was agonizingly slow. With small children, she could manage perhaps 15 kilometers in a long day, perhaps 20 if they pushed themselves beyond exhaustion. 600 kilometers at this pace meant weeks of walking, maybe more. The September heat bore down relentlessly. Dust raised by millions of footsteps hung in the air, coating everyone in a gray powder that clogged throats and stung eyes. The children grew tired quickly. Zofia had to carry the youngest when small legs gave out, the leather bag on one shoulder, a child on her hip, her free hand holding another child's hand. Progress was constantly interrupted. Military vehicles needed the roads, forcing the civilian column to the edges. Traffic bottlenecks formed at every bridge, every junction. The crowd would slow to a crawl, sometimes stopping completely for hours. At these pauses, Zofia would rest, letting the children sit while she guarded their few belongings. The leather bag never left her sight. In it was everything that mattered: their papers, their food, their future. The landscape changed slowly around them as they moved further from the city. Suburban streets gave way to highways, then to rural roads flanked by fields and forests. But the column of refugees remained constant, a ribbon of humanity stretching across the Polish countryside. The sound of an aircraft engine triggered an immediate, instinctive response in everyone on the road. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Children were grabbed. Everyone scattered, diving for cover wherever it could be found. Ditches became shelter. Potato fields became hiding places. Mothers threw themselves over their children, using their own bodies as shields. In those moments, there was no thought, only the primal drive to protect the small ones beneath you. Zofia learned to read the sky, to distinguish the distant hum of aircraft passing overhead from the purposeful sound of planes turning toward the column. She learned the terrible patience required to lie perfectly still in a ditch while her children whimpered beneath her, waiting for the danger to pass. The aftermath of these attacks left marks on the road: abandoned wagons, their owners having fled, fresh earth where people had dug hasty graves, items scattered across the road, a shoe, a bundle of clothes, silent evidence of lives interrupted. The trauma for children was acute. They learned to associate clear weather not with play and sunshine, but with danger. Blue skies meant vulnerability. Cloudy days offered the strange comfort of being hidden. Zofia had to manage this constant fear, her own and her children's. After each attack, she would check them over with trembling hands, count them, reassure them, then somehow find the strength to stand and continue walking. The leather bag had become more than luggage. She clutched it during the scrambles for cover, used it to cushion her children when they lay in ditches. It bore the marks of those days: scrapes from stones, tears from thorns, stains from the earth they pressed into again and again. Within days, the normal economy collapsed. Money lost its meaning in the countryside. Peasants who might have once gladly accepted Polish currency now wanted only barter goods, or, if you had them, gold coins. For a refugee mother, the ability to obtain food became the sole measure of success. Everything else, dignity, status, comfort, meant nothing compared to keeping your children fed. This is where Zofia's background in trade became her most valuable skill. While others might have been paralyzed by the loss of their old lives, Zofia understood the fundamental mechanics of exchange. She knew how to negotiate, how to assess what another person needed, how to make a transaction when words and circumstances were difficult. A spare sweater could become a liter of milk. Good leather boots might trade for a chicken. The jewelry sewn into coat linings could be carefully revealed when circumstances were desperate enough. But trading required items to trade, and those items diminished with every exchange. The leather bag grew lighter day by day. What had once been their portable home became an inventory that was slowly sold off, piece by piece, for survival. Water was sometimes harder to find than food. Wells in the war zone couldn't always be trusted. Streams had to be carefully assessed. Zofia learned which water was safe, which sources to avoid. She washed clothing when they passed clear streams, trying to maintain some basic hygiene even as exhaustion pulled at every muscle. Nights were cold now as September wore on. Finding shelter became a daily urgency. Sometimes a farmer would allow them space in a barn, a blessing of dry straw and shelter from the wind. Other times, they slept in the open, Zofia keeping watch while her children pressed close for warmth. The barns held their own challenges. They were crowded with strangers, all desperate, all guarding their meager possessions. Zofia had to navigate these temporary communities, securing a safe corner, staying vigilant even as exhaustion begged for sleep. Yet in the midst of the hardship, there was also kindness. Peasant women sometimes set up tables by the roadside, offering water and bread to passing refugees. These acts of compassion, small as they were, made the difference between starvation and survival. Zofia relied on this network of charity, this quiet solidarity of mothers helping mothers. 17 days into their journey, the world shifted again. News traveled down the refugee column in whispers, rumors that seemed too terrible to believe. On September 17th, the Soviet Union had invaded from the east. The safe haven they had been walking towards, the eastern provinces where families thought they could wait out the war, had vanished overnight. Poland was being divided by two powers, squeezed from both sides. Refugees who had been fleeing east suddenly found themselves walking directly towards a new danger. The route had to change. The destination transformed from a vague, somewhere safe in the east, to a desperate, south, towards the Romanian border. For Zofia, this meant turning her path. If she had been moving towards Lublin or Kielce, now she had to angle southeast towards the Carpathian Mountains and the distant border crossing she had only heard about in stories. The roads grew even more crowded as civilian and military columns merged, all funneling towards the few remaining border posts. The sense of urgency intensified. Borders could close, countries could refuse entry, time was running out. Zofia had to explain to her children that their journey was longer than she had thought. There was no safe place left in Poland. They had to keep walking, had to reach the border, had to escape while escape was still possible. The leather bag seemed heavier now, though it held less than when they started. Or perhaps it was just exhaustion making everything feel harder. Her shoulders ached from carrying it. Her feet hurt in ways she had forgotten feet could hurt. But she kept walking, because stopping meant something worse than pain.
Not everyone made it 600 kilometers. The road took its toll in ways both obvious and subtle. Hunger became a constant companion. The refugees were burning enormous amounts of energy, walking mile after mile, carrying loads, enduring stress, yet their food intake had plummeted. Bread became a luxury item, available only sporadically, and at prices that made normal people weep. Zofia scavenged where she could. Potatoes dug from fields and roasted over small fires, fruit picked from abandoned gardens. She gave the largest portions to her children and survived on whatever remained. Disease began appearing in the refugee columns. Dysentery spread in camps where too many people shared too little clean water. Exhaustion made people vulnerable to illness. Zofia had to watch her children constantly for signs of sickness, had to keep them clean despite having almost no resources for hygiene. The physical deterioration was visible in everyone. Shoes fell apart, clothing tore and went unmended. People grew thinner, their faces hollow, their movements slow. The elderly struggled most. Some simply couldn't continue. Yet there were moments of profound humanity too. Peasant families who had little themselves would share what they could: a bowl of soup, a cup of milk for a child, permission to sleep in a barn. These acts of kindness were lifelines. Zofia began to recognize the other regular walkers, the woman with 3 children who always smiled at hers, the elderly couple who somehow kept pace despite their years. They didn't speak much, everyone was too tired for conversation, but there was solidarity in the shared struggle. The leather bag bore the marks of the journey now. It was stained, scarred, repaired with cord where a buckle had broken, but it endured, just as they endured, holding together day after day through sheer necessity. The Carpathian Mountains rose ahead like a final test. After weeks of walking across flatlands and through forests, now came the challenge of altitude. For those attempting to reach Hungary or Romania, this barrier was both obstacle and hope. Crossing the mountains meant leaving Poland behind, entering a place where the immediate danger ended. But it also meant the hardest physical challenge yet. The passes were high, steep, and by late September, cold. Frost appeared in the mornings. The children's light clothing, adequate for the heat of early September, was no match for mountain air. Zofia had to conserve her remaining energy for the climb. Every item in the leather bag was reassessed. Could they survive without it? What was truly essential for crossing? The paths grew narrow, winding through forests and over rocky terrain. Mothers carried children who could no longer walk. Zofia hoisted her youngest onto her back, the leather bag swinging at her side, and climbed. The muscles in her legs burned. Her breathing came hard and fast. But others were climbing too, forming a ragged line through the forest. If they could do it, she could do it. If not for herself, then for the children depending on her. Border posts appeared finally, overwhelmed by the sheer number of refugees seeking passage.
Lines formed, hundreds, thousands of refugees waiting for permission to cross into safety. The wait was agonizing. So close to escape, yet still vulnerable. But when Zofia's turn came, when she presented her documents and the border guard waved them through, the relief was overwhelming. They had walked 600 kilometers. They had survived air attacks, hunger, exhaustion, and terror. And now finally, they were stepping across the border into a place where the sky was no longer a source of death. Crossing the border didn't mean the end of hardship. Refugee camps awaited, crowded and uncertain. The future was unclear. How long would they stay? Where would they go? Would they ever return home? But the immediate terror had ended. The sound of aircraft engines no longer sent them diving for cover. Meals, however simple, arrived with some regularity. The children could sleep without being woken by sirens. For the first time in weeks, Zofia could rest. She set down the leather bag that had been her constant burden and felt the absence of its weight like a revelation. Her shoulders ached, her feet throbbed, her entire body felt hollowed out by exhaustion. But they were alive. All of them. She had done what she set out to do. She had protected her children through 600 kilometers of chaos and brought them to safety. The leather bag sat beside her, battered but intact. It had carried everything that mattered through the exodus. Now it held only a few remaining items, but those items represented something precious: continuity. They hadn't lost everything. Something of their old life had survived the journey. Not all refugees made it this far. Some, like Zofia's fellow travelers, had stopped in provincial towns within occupied Poland, settling where they could to wait out the war. They would face different challenges: occupation, hunger, the constant risk of discovery and deportation. Those who crossed the borders faced exile, but exile with the possibility of survival. Some would eventually make their way further west, to France, to England, even to distant continents. Others would wait in camps for years, hoping for the day they could return home. Zofia's story intersects with all of these paths. Whether she stayed in occupied territory or crossed into exile, she embodied the resilience of mothers who refused to surrender their children to the void. Today, objects like Zofia's leather bag rest in museums and archives. They are displayed behind glass, labeled with dates and brief descriptions. But these objects carry stories that transcend their physical form. Every scratch on that bag, every repair, every stain tells part of a larger narrative about what humans endure for those they love. That bag once held everything a family owned. It was clutched during air raids, used as a pillow in barns, lightened piece by piece as survival demanded. It absorbed sweat and dust, rain and tears. It witnessed a mother's courage enacted kilometer after kilometer across a disintegrating nation. The 600 kilometers Zofia walked cannot be measured only in distance. It was also measured in worn-out shoes, in calories burned, in fear managed and hope maintained. It was measured in 1,000 small decisions made under impossible circumstances: which road to take, when to rest, what to trade, how to soothe frightened children. The bag became more than luggage. It was a mobile home, a connection to the past, a promise of future. As long as they had it, as long as they could carry forward even one object from their former life, they hadn't lost everything. Visitors to museums today look at such artifacts and see history. But these objects ask us to see humanity, to recognize that every statistic about refugees represents individual footsteps taken by real people who felt fear, exhaustion, hope, and love. 75 years have passed since Zofia Kowalska walked those 600 kilometers. The world she knew, the Poland of 1939, ceased to exist. But the courage she demonstrated lives on, not as abstract heroism, but as testimony to what mothers throughout history have done when protecting their children. She wasn't a soldier. She had no weapons, no training in survival. She had only determination, resourcefulness, and fierce maternal love. Her story reminds us that war's impact extends far beyond battlefields. For every soldier who fought, There were mothers, children, and elderly people struggling to survive the chaos that war creates. Their journeys receive fewer monuments, but they represent the vast majority of war's victims. Today's peaceful streets, the security we sometimes take for granted, rest on the foundation of what those refugees endured. They carried forward not just their belongings, but culture, memory, and the continuity of families that would build new futures from the ashes of destruction. The leather bag in the museum represents all of this. It stands as evidence that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when survival demands it, that a mother's love can sustain life through circumstances designed to end it, that hope can be carried 600 kilometers on aching feet through a landscape of terror. Zofia Kowalska's journey ended when she crossed a border or found shelter in a provincial town. But her story continues in the generations that followed. Children who grew up remembering their mother's strength, grandchildren who inherited the knowledge that survival is possible, even when everything seems lost. We don't know every detail of her 600 kilometers. History often preserves objects better than it preserves the full stories of ordinary people, but we know enough to honor what she represented. The countless mothers who walked similar roads, who made similar sacrifices, who carried similar bags, holding similar memories. Their stories matter because they remind us of the human cost behind historical dates and military campaigns. They teach us that courage is often quiet, enacted in small decisions made day after day. That resilience is built from exhaustion and fear, but refusing to quit. That love can be measured in kilometers walked on bleeding feet. If you were in Zofia's place, having to leave everything behind with only what you could carry, what would matter most to you? What object would you protect above all others? What would you want your children to remember about home? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes thinking about these questions helps us understand not just history, but what truly matters in our own lives.